If you're a trucker, you've heard of Rick "Coyote" Mendez. 30 years on the road, knew every curve, every truck stop, every danger out there. But there are things that not even 30 years of experience can prepare you for. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 months ago, and it still gives me chills. Some nights I can still hear his voice echoing through the CB radio. I was Rick's dispatcher for the last 8 years of his career. November 15th started like any other day. Rick was hauling auto parts from Sao Paulo to Recife, same route he'd driven hundreds of times, could probably do it blindfolded. The weather was clear, new moon, perfect conditions for night driving. He checked in at 6 p.m, right on schedule, voice steady and confident like always. Around 10 p.m, I noticed something odd on the radio frequencies. The usual chatter from night drivers had gone completely silent. No jokes, no weather updates, no warnings about speed traps, nothing. Even the regulars who never shut up were off the air. I tried reaching a few drivers I knew were on that route, but got nothing but static. Rick's voice crackled through around 11:30 p.m, but something was different. His usual confident tone had this edge to it, like he was concentrating on something. "Dispatch, this is Coyote. Everything's running smooth, but..." He paused for a long moment. "It's too quiet out here tonight. Feels like I'm the only crazy bastard awake." I told him to keep his eyes open and check in every hour. The GPS showed him making good time, right where he should be. But there was something in his voice that made me uneasy. In 8 years, I'd never heard Rick sound uncertain about anything. The man had driven through blizzards, hurricanes, and riots without breaking a sweat. At 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a WhatsApp audio from the driver's group chat. Rick's voice, but strained, like he was squinting at something in the darkness. "Guys, I just passed Kilometer 66. There was something strange on the shoulder." Static interference cut through the middle of his sentence. "Looked like someone just standing there, but when I hit the brights, nothing." I immediately tried calling him back, but it went straight to voicemail. Checked the GPS. His truck was still moving, maintaining speed. Maybe he'd driven into a dead zone. Happened sometimes in remote areas, but that feeling in my gut was getting worse. Rick had been driving that route for decades. He knew every dead zone, every tower location. The other drivers in the group started responding to his audio. "What did you see, Coyote? You okay out there, brother?" But Rick never answered. His truck kept moving on the GPS, steady 80 kilometers per hour. I watched that little blue dot crawling across my screen, waiting for him to check in. Hours passed. Dawn was breaking, and Rick should have reached his delivery point. The GPS showed his truck had stopped about 120 miles past where it should have been. I called the customer. Rick never showed up. My hands were shaking as I dialed the highway patrol. Something was very, very wrong. When they found the truck, the engine was still running, headlights cutting through the morning mist, hazard lights blinking. Driver's door was open, keys in the ignition, Rick's coffee still warm in the cup holder. But Rick, Coyote Mendez, was nowhere to be found, and that's when they discovered the dashcam was still recording. The highway patrol called me back 3 hours later, and I could hear the confusion in the officer's voice. "Sir, we need you to come down here and look at something. Your driver's dashcam was recording all night." I drove those 2 hours in complete silence, my mind racing through possibilities. When I arrived at the scene, Rick's blue Volvo sat there like a ghost ship, engine ticking as it cooled. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with something else, something cold and earthy that made my skin crawl. Officer Martinez led me to his patrol car, where they'd set up a laptop to review the footage. "We've watched this 3 times already," he said, shaking his head. "Your guy seems to be talking to someone, but..." He hit play and there was Rick, clear as day, hands on the wheel, looking relaxed. But every few minutes he'd turn to the passenger seat and speak to empty air. "The audio's clear, but there's nobody there," Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible. At timestamp 2:15 a.m. I watched Rick slow down and peer through the windshield. He was approaching a weathered road sign, Kilometer 666, but something was wrong with the image. The sign looked ancient, rust-eaten, like it had been there for decades. Rick's voice came through the speakers. "Well, I'll be damned. Never noticed that marker before." He was squinting at the shoulder, and I could see his knuckles whiten as he gripped the wheel tighter. That's when Rick sent the audio to our group chat. But watching the video, I noticed something chilling. As he spoke into his phone, his breath was visible in the cabin. The heater gauge showed normal temperature, but Rick was breathing vapor like he was in a freezer. After he finished recording, he set the phone down and turned to the empty passenger seat. "You feel that too?" he asked the air. "Getting cold in here, isn't it?" The next 20 minutes of footage showed Rick's behavior slowly changing. He kept glancing at the passenger seat, nodding occasionally, even chuckling at unheard jokes. His driving became erratic, swerving slightly as if avoiding something in the road, slowing down for invisible obstacles. The dashboard clock showed 2:47 a.m. when the air conditioning suddenly kicked on full blast. Rick didn't seem to notice, but I could see him shivering as he reached over to adjust something on the passenger side. By 3:15 a.m., Rick was having full conversations with his invisible passenger. "So how long have you been walking out here?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. "That's a long way from home, friend. I can take you as far as the next town." The temperature display on the dashboard had dropped to 45 degrees, and Rick's breath fogged the windshield with every word. He turned up the heater, but it didn't seem to help. The frost was forming on the inside of the windows. The most disturbing part came at 3:33 a.m. Rick suddenly pulled over to the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. He turned to face the passenger seat directly, and his expression changed to one of deep sympathy. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said softly. "Nobody should have to go through that alone." He reached across and appeared to pat something on the passenger seat. The seat cushion actually compressed under his touch, as if someone was really sitting there. Officer Martinez paused the video and looked at me with haunted eyes. "Watch his face in the next part," he said quietly. Rick's expression had shifted to something I'd never seen before, a mix of sadness and determination. He unbuckled his seatbelt and turned off the engine, but left the headlights on. "Come on," he said to his invisible companion. "Let's get you where you need to go." The dashboard clock read 3:47 a.m. as Rick opened the driver's door and stepped out into the darkness. The final footage showed Rick walking around the front of the truck, illuminated by the headlights. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he was walking alongside someone. About 20 feet from the truck, he stopped and turned back toward the dashcam. His lips moved, but the audio was too faint to make out. A forensic lip reader later told us he was saying, "Don't come looking for me." Then Rick walked into the darkness beyond the headlight beams and simply vanished. The dashcam kept recording for another 4 hours until the battery died. 4 hours of an empty cab, engine cooling, frost slowly melting off the windows as the sun rose. When they found the truck the next morning, the passenger seat was soaking wet with condensation. There were muddy footprints on the floor mat, size 11 boots, Rick's size. But there was another set of prints too, smaller, barefoot, leading from the passenger side door into the surrounding woods. The strangest part, those barefoot prints were filled with ice-cold water, even though it hadn't rained in days. The investigation dragged on for weeks, but nothing made sense. I spent sleepless nights going over Rick's route, checking every detail, every possibility. The highway department sent a crew to verify the kilometer markers on that stretch of road. What they found made my blood run cold. There was no kilometer 6066 on that highway. The markers jumped from 1665 straight to 1667, just like they had for the past 20 years. According to the official records, a kilometer 666 marker had never existed on that route. I couldn't let it go. Against my better judgment, I drove that same route 3 weeks after Rick disappeared. It was around 2 a.m. when I reached the spot where his truck was found. The road stretched empty in both directions, just asphalt and darkness. But as I passed what should have been kilometer 666, my CB radio crackled to life. Static at first, then Rick's voice, clear as if he was sitting right next to me. "Guys, I just passed kilometer 66. There was something strange on the shoulder." I slammed on the brakes so hard my coffee spilled across the dashboard. The radio went silent immediately, but my hands were shaking as I grabbed the microphone. Rick, is that you?" Nothing but dead air. I checked my watch. 2:47 a.m., exactly the same time he'd sent that final audio 3 weeks ago. My engine was running, my headlights were on, but the silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the darkness was listening. Other drivers started reporting similar experiences. Carlos Mendez swore he heard Rick's voice on Channel 19 while hauling through that area. Maria Santos claimed she saw a blue Volvo in her mirrors, but when she looked again, it was gone. The reports always came from the same stretch of highway, always around 2:47 a.m. Some drivers began taking alternate routes, adding hours to their trips just to avoid that section of road. 2 months after Rick vanished, I received a call from his brother Miguel. "They found something," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Rick's phone. A hiker had discovered it buried under leaves about a mile from where the truck was found. The strange thing was, the phone was still charged, still functional. Miguel brought it to me, and when I powered it on, There were dozens of unread messages, all from Rick's own number, all sent after he disappeared. The messages were timestamps showing they'd been sent every night at 2:47 a.m. for the past 2 months. Each one was identical. "Guys, I just passed Kilometer 6666. There was something strange on the shoulder." I showed Miguel the dashcam footage, explained what we'd discovered. His face went pale as he listened. "That's not like Rick," he whispered. "Rick would never abandon his truck. He'd never leave without telling someone where he was going." That's when Miguel told me about Rick's childhood, how he'd always picked up hitchhikers, even against company policy. "He said everyone deserves help when they're stranded," Miguel explained. "Even as a kid, Rick couldn't walk past someone in need." The pieces started falling into place. Rick had encountered someone who needed help, someone who had been walking that stretch of road for a very long time. I decided to dig deeper into the history of that highway. What I found in the local newspaper archives made my skin crawl. November 15, 1994, exactly 30 years before Rick disappeared, a young woman named Elena Vasquez had been killed in a hit-and-run accident. Her body was found at what would have been Kilometer 666, but the marker was removed after the accident. The official report stated she'd been walking alone, trying to get home after her car broke down. 3 months have passed since Rick vanished, and his phone still sends that same message every night at 2:47 a.m. I've changed my number, moved to a different city, but somehow the messages still find me. The insurance company refuses to pay out because there's no proof of death. Rick's family still makes the truck payments, hoping he'll come back. But I know he won't. He's found someone who needed help more than he needed to come home. Last week, I heard from a trucker named Jim, who drives that route regularly. He swears he saw Rick's blue Volvo parked on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. But when he stopped to help, the truck was empty except for wet footprints on the floor. As Jim was leaving, he glanced in his rearview mirror and saw 2 figures walking hand in hand into the darkness, a tall man in a trucker's cap and a young woman in a white dress. They were heading toward a road sign that read, Kilometer 6686, a sign that shouldn't exist but apparently does for those who need to find their way home. 6 months after Rick disappeared, I thought I was done with that cursed stretch of highway. I'd changed jobs, moved across the country, even switched to day shifts to avoid night driving. But some things have a way of following you, no matter how far you run. The messages from Rick's phone had stopped coming to my number, but I started receiving calls from other dispatchers, other drivers, all asking the same question. Have you heard about the blue Volvo? The reports were coming in from truckers nationwide, not just that one highway. A blue Volvo with hazard lights flashing, always spotted between 2:47 and 3:47 a.m., sometimes parked on the shoulder, sometimes driving alongside other trucks. The drivers who saw it described the same thing, a man in a trucker's cap behind the wheel, and a woman in white in the passenger seat. They'd wave, smile, and then vanish when you looked away for just a second. I started keeping a journal of every sighting, every report. The pattern was always the same. Lone drivers, usually hauling long distances, always during the darkest hours before dawn. But it wasn't random. Every trucker who reported seeing Rick's ghost had one thing in common. They'd all stopped to help someone on the road within the past month. A stranded motorist, a hitchhiker, someone who needed assistance. It was as if Rick was checking on them, making sure they were the kind of people who deserved to keep driving safely. Then came the call that changed everything. Tony Rodriguez, a driver from Texas, contacted me through the Truckers Forum. "I saw your post about the blue Volvo," he said. "I need to tell you something, but you're not going to believe it." Tony had been driving through Colorado when he spotted Rick's truck on the shoulder. Instead of passing by, he'd pulled over to help. What he found made him question everything he thought he knew about life and death. The truck was there, engine running, just like you described, Tony explained. But when I walked up to the driver's side, Rick was sitting there, solid as you or me. He looked tired, really tired, but he smiled when he saw me. Tony said Rick had asked him to deliver a message, to tell the trucking community that he was okay, that he'd found his purpose. He said he's helping people find their way home now, people who've been lost for a long time. According to Tony, Rick had explained that some souls get trapped between worlds, unable to move on because they died with unfinished business. Elena Vasquez had been one of those souls, walking that highway for 30 years, waiting for someone with a pure heart to help her cross over. Rick said the road called to him because he was the right person for the job, Tony continued. But now he's stuck too, helping others like Elena find peace. The most disturbing part of Tony's story was what Rick had shown him. Inside the truck, the passenger seat wasn't empty. It was filled with flowers, fresh flowers that smelled like a funeral parlor. Rick told me that every person he helps leaves something behind, Tony whispered. A flower, a photo, a personal item. He's helped dozens of them now, maybe hundreds. The whole truck is full of memories from people who finally found their way home. But Rick had also given Tony a warning. He said the road is getting hungrier, Tony explained. More souls are getting trapped and he can't help them all. He's looking for others like him, drivers with compassionate hearts who aren't afraid to help a stranger. The implication was clear. Rick was recruiting other truckers to join him in his eternal mission. The thought made my blood run cold. 3 weeks after my conversation with Tony, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a CB radio, vintage model, still in working condition. A note was attached. For emergency use only, Channel 19, 2:47 a.m. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity got the better of me. That night, I plugged it in and waited. At exactly 2:47 a.m., Rick's voice crackled through the static. "Dispatch, this is Coyote. I need you to do me a favor." His voice was exactly as I remembered. Calm, confident, but with that underlying sadness I'd heard in his final audio. "There's a young driver named Sarah Mitchell, Highway 95 northbound. She's going to break down around mile marker 247 in about 20 minutes. She's got a sick kid at home, can't afford to miss work. Make sure someone stops to help her." The radio went silent, but I could feel Rick's presence somehow, waiting for my response. I picked up the microphone with shaking hands and whispered, "Copy that, Coyote. I'll make sure she gets help." The last thing I heard was Rick's familiar chuckle, followed by, "Thanks, partner. See you on the flip side." I became Rick's liaison with the living world, and I wish I could tell you it was a blessing. Every night at 2:47 a.m., that vintage CB radio would crackle to life with another request. A stranded family in Nevada, a broken-down rookie driver in Montana, someone who needed help that only I could coordinate. At first, I felt honored to be part of something bigger, something meaningful. But as the months passed, I realized I was becoming as trapped as Rick, bound to that radio, to those desperate voices calling through the static. The calls started affecting my health. I'd lost 30 pounds, couldn't sleep except in brief, exhausted bursts between 3 a.m. and dawn. My wife left me, said I was talking to ghosts more than I talked to her. She wasn't wrong. Every emergency Rick reported, I had to verify and coordinate help for. I'd call highway patrol, contact nearby truckers, do whatever it took to make sure nobody else ended up walking that dark road alone. Then came the night that changed everything. Rick's voice was different, urgent, almost panicked. "Dispatch, we've got a problem. There's a driver heading south on I-77, mile marker 186. He's not going to make it past Kilometer 666. My blood froze. I'd never heard fear in Rick's voice before, not even in his final audio. "This one's different," he continued. "He's angry, bitter. If he stops to help her, he won't be helping out of kindness. He'll be helping for the wrong reasons." I tried to raise the southbound driver on the radio, but got no response. Rick's voice crackled back. "His name is Marcus Webb, driving a red Peterbilt. He's got a history of violence, just got out of prison last month. If he encounters Elena..." Rick's voice trailed off into static. When it returned, there was something I'd never heard before. Desperation. "You have to stop him, whatever it takes. If Marcus helps her, he won't be guiding lost souls home. He'll be trapping them, feeding off their pain." I called every trucker I knew on that route, begging them to intercept Marcus Webb. Finally, a driver named Janet Stone responded. She was about 15 minutes ahead of Marcus, said she'd try to slow him down, but as she was talking, her voice started changing, becoming strained, frightened. "There's something wrong with this road," she whispered. "The mile markers are going backwards. I passed 195 minutes ago, now I'm at 185, and there's a woman walking on the shoulder." The radio exploded with static, then went silent. I tried calling Janet back, but got nothing. For 3 hours I sat in my kitchen, staring at that cursed radio, waiting for news. Finally, at 6 a.m., a highway patrol officer called me. They'd found Janet's truck parked on the shoulder, engine running, hazard lights flashing. She was sitting in the driver's seat, catatonic, staring straight ahead. When they tried to talk to her, she just kept repeating, "He took her. He took her away." Janet spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility before she could tell anyone what happened. She said she'd encountered Marcus Webb's red Peterbilt, just as Rick had predicted. But instead of helping Elena cross over, Marcus had somehow captured her, bound her to his truck. "I saw her face in his passenger window," Janet whispered. She was screaming, but no sound came out, and Marcus was laughing, like he'd won some kind of prize. That's when I understood the true horror of what Rick had become part of. The road didn't just call to good people, it called to anyone with strong enough will to interact with the supernatural. But while Rick used his connection to help lost souls find peace, others could use that same power for darker purposes. Marcus Webb had become something worse than a ghost. He'd become a collector of souls, trapping them for his own twisted satisfaction. The radio calls from Rick stopped coming after that night. For months, I thought maybe he'd finally found peace, or perhaps the connection had been severed. But then the reports started coming in from truckers across the country. A red Peterbilt with tinted windows, always spotted in the darkest hours before dawn. Drivers who saw it described the same thing. Faces pressed against the passenger side windows, dozens of them, all silently screaming. I tried to destroy the CB radio, but it wouldn't die. I smashed it with a hammer, threw it in a lake, even tried to burn it. But every night at 2:47 a.m., I'd find it back on my kitchen table, intact and crackling with static. Rick's voice would come through, weaker now, more distant. "We need your help. Marcus is collecting more of them." Elena was just the beginning, and I realized that my role in this supernatural nightmare was far from over. I was the bridge between Rick's world and ours, and as long as trucks rolled down dark highways, there would always be souls in need of guidance and predators ready to exploit them.